It certainly wasn't easy. Iowa pushed back big time. Their defense came ready to play in Indianapolis. But Michigan claims their third consecutive Big Ten title, and they're going to have a chance to play in the college football playoff and maybe for a national title.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Phil Parker drew up a great defensive game plan in defending the Michigan Wolverines. They do such a great job in the secondary with their zone coverage, and they did that again in this Big Ten championship game against Michigan. The defense, did everything that they were supposed to do to keep the Hawkeyes in this game as long as they did. So that zone coverage, keeping everything in front of them, not getting beat deep, not letting guys like Roman Wilson on the edge get over the top on the outside, not letting the great tight end Colston Loveland kind of beat you deep along the seam, possibly against a linebacker. I thought Iowa drew up as good as a defensive game plan as you can against Michigan, and that we've seen against the Michigan Wolverines this season. Early in this game, JJ was in a rhythm with quick passes and short passes, but they weren't going for very far. You look at his final numbers, he threw it a good amount of times, but the yardage just isn't there to match the pass attempts. And you have to give the credit to that for Phil Parker and this defense and what they really threw out there. I thought they did a really good job. And then you got to talk about the run game, right? I've said it multiple times about Michigan this season. They can beat you any way they choose to beat you. So you go to the run game, okay? Passing game, it's short, it's quick. We're not getting a ton down the field. What about the run game? Iowa bottled up that run game about as much as anybody has to the Michigan Wolverines this season. So you take on what you're doing in coverage, kind of keeping everything in front of you, and then you bottle up the run game, and then there's some shuffling as well. This was the first full game without Zach Zinter on that offensive line. Iowa was able to get pressure when J.J. McCarthy kind of has deeper dropbacks, and this is what you got. A great defensive performance for the Iowa Hawkeyes in this game. As this game is progressing, as this game is going down, I can't help but think, what would this game be like with a healthy and a very motivated Cade McNamara? What would this game be like with some of these other receivers on this team? What, the Eric Alls and the Luke Lachey's, what would this game be like with a healthy Iowa Hawkeyes football team? I think this game would be a lot different. I think Iowa, of course, would have a little bit more offensive, I don't know if I should say firepower, but you get the general idea and you get the general direction that I'm kind of headed with that. But it's the same old story for the Iowa Hawkeyes. And it's been the same old story for 3 years, right? You go out there and your offense is uncreative and it's kind of a lumbering and slow offense. And then you look at the defensive side for the Michigan Wolverine. That's a fast defense. That's an athletic defense. That is an attacking defense as well. You saw a big-time difference in terms of the speed, in terms of the athleticism. But it's the same old story. And then when the Hawkeyes can't run the football, you put the ball into Deacon hands. You try to make him move the ball down the field. Man, there's got to be a better option at quarterback. I know some people have been saying that within Hawkeye circles as well, but this is what this Iowa team has been trotting out there. Sure, there have been few bright spots in Deacon Hill and some of the plays that he's made pushing the football down the field, but overall, the Iowa that you saw within this football game is really the Iowa that we've seen for the most part throughout the past 3 years, especially kind of going back to that season 3 years ago where they lost 42-3 against the Michigan Wolverines in the Big Ten championship game. Now, when we talk about Michigan in this football game, 17 of their 26 points were scored on short fields. You look at that long punt return, the longest punt return, by the way, in Big Ten championship history. by Samaj Morgan. And then some of those turnovers, the punt return and 2 fumbles led to 2 touchdowns and a field goal for Michigan in this game. It put a lot of pressure on that Iowa defense when Michigan was able to get these short fields. When Michigan had to go the length of the field, it got a little bit tougher for the Wolverines, didn't it? It was very difficult to chain together first downs on this Iowa Hawkeye defense and really move the football down the field. But I thought Michigan did a good job staying with it throughout this game. I'm sure it was frustrating to go back in the huddle and go back into the sidelines on some of those drives and try to figure out, how do you get big chunk yardage? How do you get those chunk plays against this Iowa Hawkeyes defense? But they stuck with it. Their defense, the Michigan defense, certainly helped them out within this football game as well. Here's the thing. When Michigan was playing ahead early, even at a 10-0 lead early in this game, they put Iowa in an extremely uncomfortable situation. Iowa is so good when they can get the lead early and kind of play into that with flipping the field position and kind of how they call some things. Of course, they're conservative offense and some things they call on the defensive side of the ball. But when Michigan got ahead early by double digits, it puts so much pressure and it puts Iowa in an unfamiliar and an uncomfortable situation in what they have to do trying to move the football down the field. You know, there's a lot in this game, especially on the Iowa side of things, that we've seen for many times over the past 3 years. Iowa really tried to target Caleb Brown throughout this game as well, because that was the playmaker on the team. With all due respect to guys like Addison Ostrenga and Nico Ragaini, they need to get the ball to Caleb Brown. Caleb Brown's going to be that guy next year for the Iowa Hawkeyes. He's going to be the guy. He's going to be the playmaker that if this Iowa program in a new Big Ten is going to have success, Cade McNamara throwing the ball to Caleb Brown might be a part of that success in this game. Michigan, right? You got to think that there might be some question marks at 2 position groups on the offensive side of the football. The Michigan offensive line and the Michigan wide receivers. You take a look at those wide receivers, right? It's not the most explosive group. It's not the greatest group in the country, but they've gotten the job done this season. This was a group against Iowa's secondary, right? An Iowa secondary that I mentioned kept everything in front of them. This was a group at Michigan, at these wide receivers, that had a tough time separating and creating distance between these Iowa defensive backs to be able to get open to help J.J. McCarthy out in this passing game. And then you look at that offensive line, right? When you had deeper dropbacks throughout this game, Iowa got a little bit more pressure. When it took more time for these routes to develop, that allowed more time for this Iowa pass rush to get in there. I'll give you some good news, though, Michigan. This is a awesome Iowa defense, right? It is probably a top 10 defense throughout all of college football. Are you going to see a defense like this, like an Ohio State, like a Penn State in the college football playoff? You might see bits and pieces, but you've faced some really good defenses lately, and you've been able to power through some of those defenses, this Iowa Hawkeyes team included. Michigan, now, you got to be playing your best football, your best foot forward. Now it's time, right? The past 2 years you fell in the college football playoff semifinals. Okay, maybe it wasn't your best offensive performance against Iowa. But right now, other than Zach Zinter, you got everybody healthy. You got everybody in the position, you're full strength across the board, other than big number 65. Now is your chance. This is why everybody came back. To get this opportunity in the college football playoff, to win a semifinal, to play in a national championship game. I'm very curious how this preparation is going to go. I'm going to anticipate big time who the Michigan opponent is going to be. I think it's going to be very fun and interesting to see who the Wolverines match up with in the semifinals, to see if they have some matchup advantages on the interior. Can they run the ball? Can they throw the ball? How's their defense going to match up as well? It's going to be fun to see Michigan go up against whoever it is in the semifinals, to see if they can finally win a national championship for the first time since 1997. Boy, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be interesting. Like I said, it wasn't the greatest performance in the world for the Michigan Wolverines throughout this game. Big time pushback from the Iowa Hawkeyes throughout this game. And I anticipated pushback in the first half of this football game. And Iowa was pushing back. I don't think there was ever a time in this game where Michigan, we started slow, but we really got it going. I'm not sure if there was ever that time where they really seemed to turn the corner, where it's like, okay, now we're humming, now we're going. Lots of short fields. The defense really helped out the Michigan offense throughout this game. Let's get to some comments throughout this one as well. It was an interesting night for these conference championship game, dubs up, kind of talking about it. This game and the Florida State game were tough to watch. There were some good games, right, throughout the day, right? There was a great game last night, of course, Oregon and Washington, two future Big Ten teams going at it. But, yeah, tonight was certainly an interesting night. Certainly an interesting night for some football as well. Paul Wall chiming in that Penn State. You mentioned that Penn State game there, Paul. There was an opportunity for Iowa. They got a short field of their own. And that when they fumbled it, that reminded me a lot of that Penn State game. Remember, they got a short field, and then they kind of fumbled it back, and then it kind of spiraled out of control after that. It was very, very reminiscent of that as well. BK checking in here this evening. Got Michigan at 1. Washington at 2, Florida State at 3, and Texas at 4, and they talked about it on the broadcast. What are they going to leave Florida State, an undefeated Power 5 champion, out of the playoff? Out of the playoff. That's the big question surrounding everything right now. That's the big discussion point. Are they going to leave Florida State out of the college football playoff? Al Hollywood chiming in. Iowa might be the weirdest team that I've ever seen. It was certainly, here's the thing with that I will say about the Iowa Hawkeyes is, look, it was a weird season with injuries and the whole Brian Ferentz deal. It was certainly odd, but you'll take an odd season if you go 10-2. We'll see who they match up with in the bowl game. I think that's possibly, it depends on the matchup to see what's going to happen. Of course, on Monday, we're going to start to have transfer portal stuff. So that, we'll see transfer portal opt-outs, that kind of thing. You're going to start to really see more of that. So I'm very curious to see what direction that's going to go for a team like Iowa, their bowl matchup. This could be an 11-win team, folks. This could be an 11-win team. I said it in my commentary just now. It's going to be, Iowa fans are going to look back on this season and they're going to look at what could have been if they would have stayed healthy. I don't know what the difference would have been, right? Maybe the Minnesota game flips in terms of wins and losses. Of course, they won a lot of games. I don't think they would have beaten Penn State, right? That game, even with Cade McNamara early in that game, wasn't going great. So, it's hard. And Cade McNamara kind of started the season. He was I think his ribs were kind of banged up as well, and so that didn't help. It was just one thing after another with this Iowa team, and they've got some questions, right? Who are they going to bring as the offensive coordinator? There's even questions, will Kirk Ferentz return as the head coach at Iowa? Big questions. Yeah, there's going to be a lot, especially now with this new era of the Big Ten, where it's going to be much, much more difficult for a team like Iowa to get to Indianapolis. Like, they've got pieces like coming back. Okay, the defense is still going to have to replace some guys, but there are some pieces coming back for Iowa to be a decent football team. Here's another college football playoff rankings prediction. So we got verses here. Michigan versus Bama at 1-4 here for Joe Raimi. Michigan versus Bama, so that's a Big Ten champ versus SEC champ. over there. That would probably be the Rose Bowl, possibly in the scenario. And then the Sugar Bowl would be Washington as the number 2 team in the country against Texas in this scenario. Do you leave out a Florida State team, an undefeated Florida State team, ACC Power 5 champions? Do you leave them out? Final score, I just popped it up there, 16-6 in favor of the Noles over the Jeff Brom-led Louisville Cardinals. More from Joe Raimi. He's saying you can't leave the SEC champion out. And that's the big talking point right now. And I do agree with what some people are saying. If you include Bama, you got to include Texas and vice versa. If you include Texas, you got to include Alabama, considering their head-to-head matchup earlier on in this season. Shyman Hawkins, Michigan, Washington, Texas, and Florida State. No Alabama. Can you imagine? Can you just imagine the reaction of SEC fans if the SEC champion does not get into the playoff? I want to say this. I did see Kirby Smart's post-game press conference. I had to chuckle a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I had to laugh because I just, there's a lot of scenarios out there. I don't know if they include Georgia. Right now that we know the results, now that everything has settled, the dust has settled, Florida State wins, Michigan wins, Washington wins, and Alabama wins. Look, Georgia, I get it. You were close. You won, 29 consecutive games, I think it was? And you lose in your conference championship game. Not a conference champion. You can make the same argument possibly about a team like Ohio State. Right, an 11-1 team that was 30-some-odd yards from possibly beating Michigan on the road. It's close, but not enough. That's where I'm at. It's close, but it's just not enough. When you have a 4-team playoff, these are the types of decisions that you have to factor in. Yes, I know they say it is the 4 best teams. But then they also say this is why the criteria of this 4-team playoff is kind of messed up. It says, well, we're taking the 4 best teams in college football, but we also emphasize things like conference championships in our decision-making process. So, okay, you're taking the 4 best teams. If you think Georgia is a top 4 team, but they didn't win a conference championship, you kind of see where that can kind of go back and forth as well. Silas Suley, it's the Fest. 10-0. 10-0. The East Division never lost a Big Ten championship game. There were games that came close. I go back to 2016 when my Wisconsin Badgers were in the Big Ten title game against Penn State. The Nittany Lions ended up pulling that one out. There were games, of course, Iowa and Michigan State back in 2015. That goal line play, low-scoring defensive battle between the Spartans and the Hawkeyes. There were close games, but the Big Ten West could never come out on top against the Big Ten East since 2014 when this alignment with the Rutgers Scarlet Knights and the Maryland Terrapins kind of took out as well. Let's get some more. Drop who you think is your top 4 in the comments, because I'm very curious of what people really think right now. Michigan versus Florida State. Washington versus Texas. JP2 says nada to the SEC champion. And now Georgia was on top. I don't think Georgia was ultra impressive all year long. Okay, and then Alabama goes and they can be like, look at these 2 teams. Alabama and Georgia, the last 2 weeks of the season. Georgia, a 1-score win over Georgia Tech. And then Alabama needing a miracle on 4th and 30, whatever, to defeat Auburn on the road. Folks, I know this is not, you can't go back and you can't think about what if, but I'm going to go to a what if scenario here. What happens if Alabama doesn't pull off that miracle? What happens if you have a 2-loss Alabama as your SEC champion? Does Georgia still get in? Wow, I know that's a totally different discussion for a totally different time, but man, it's different. It's different, but it's certainly something that those hypotheticals that you might think of a few years down the road of what would have happened in that particular situation. But now with the top, we're going to probably go to a 5+7 right format in this college football playoff. Now I think that discussion, of course, with those conference champions coming in, it's less up there. So less up there. So a lot of people talking. Here's another one from Silas: Michigan and Washington, and Texas versus Florida State. Boy, if you go the best 4 teams right now, if that's your ultimate criteria, even though earlier today on Twitter I said you got to put in an undefeated Power 5 champion, you got to put in Florida State, right? If Jordan Travis doesn't get hurt, like there are so many little things throughout a season that determine what happens. If Jordan Travis doesn't get hurt, of course, they kind of win these games later in the season by probably a wider margin, then they look a little bit more impressive. If J. Trav doesn't get hurt, the SEC is probably on the outside looking in, right? Because you're putting in the Florida State Seminoles, all right? You're putting in Michigan, you're putting in Washington, and are you putting in Texas on a head-to-head? Once again, hypotheticals, right? When we look back on this season, what if Alabama didn't get that Hail Mary, right, against Auburn? What if Jordan Travis never got injured? So many little what ifs that affected some things. Is the committee, they might be staying up late, saying, are we going to leave out an undefeated Power 5 champion from the ACC? BK, the committee shouldn't knock down FSU now. They should have ranked them lower a few weeks ago. That would have possibly set the precedent for the move that they are about to make. I kind of made that argument about if kind of everything shaped out and it came down to, say, Texas and a team like Ohio State, right? Ohio State was ranked above Texas, so maybe did it set the precedent for the committee that Ohio State was in that position? Now I think we're well beyond that. Of course, the Buckeyes are not going to get into the college football playoff. This is part of the reason. Of course, there's financial reasons also involved, but part of the reason why we are moving on to a 12-team college football playoff. I like 12 teams. I like having the top 2 teams kind of face each other in some of these conference championship games. Look, I like what's happening right now within college football. I just, college football is gonna look a lot different, and this is kind of the final era. This is the final swan song with all of this right now. So yeah, it's gonna be very interesting to see. Now, who do we know is in? I think we know Michigan is in. I think we know Washington is in. Is that all we know right now? We don't know FSU's in, right? A lot of people think that the Florida State Seminoles are on the outside looking in. All right, who else is there? What else we got? Texas. Not everybody's sold with Texas. Not everybody's sold with Alabama. Right, it's Michigan and Washington, and then who are the remaining teams? Who are the other 2 best teams? If we're going, who are those other teams? I think it's Texas and I think it's Alabama. Even though earlier today, I've always been a more deserving guy, but that is technically not the criteria. That is not the criteria that is being shared right now. That's not what we're talking about. Check it out, chiming in. 12 teams is too many. Too many. Let's go to Gary Morris. Love seeing these Hawkeye fans get shut out. They played 2 good teams the entire season, according to Gary. Look, it was not they did everything that they were asked to do, right? They won the Big Ten West. This is exactly the position that they met all the criteria, right, as the famous Isaiah Thomas meme and everything happened. I think we all knew what this end result was going to be in the Big Ten Championship. We knew Michigan was going to take control of this football game. We had a good feeling that the Wolverines were going to we're going to control this for the majority of the action. Now, Iowa did push back a considerable amount of time. I thought Iowa put together, I said this at the beginning of this show, I thought Iowa put together a really good game plan on the defensive side of the football to kind of limit Michigan, bottle up that run game, keep all of the pass game kind of in front of them as well. Let's go to a comment here from Rob Moon. I think I want to go to here. Number 8 ranked team, Alabama, beat number 1 ranked team, Georgia. Number 8 team ranked yesterday, today. Will the number 1 team stay the same? Now, Georgia is moving. I think that's one thing people can agree on. I think the number 1 team, I think there could be a little bit of a debate. Okay, whose wins between Michigan and Washington are better right now? Now that we don't, right? Georgia kind of ruined it for everybody, right? We were going to get a Michigan versus a Washington, old Big Ten versus Pac-12 Rose Bowl. Now that that's not on the table anymore, it's the matchup. Okay, if it's Texas and Alabama as those two teams, it's all about the matchup. Okay, Washington, you're comparing their 2 wins against a really good Oregon team, and then you kind of factor in Michigan and their wins against Penn State, and then their wins against Ohio State, Iowa, whether you like it or not. Iowa is still a ranked win. It's still beating a team with 10 wins this season. Which direction is the committee going to go on that one? It would not be egregious for them, I think, to go in either direction as it pertains to Michigan and Washington. I could see it going down either way, and I wouldn't put up too much of a gripe either way, even though Washington down the stretch, I kind of mentioned this on last night's live program, that Washington, prior to their game last night against Oregon, right, they'd kind of been going on a downward trajectory. Michigan has been kind of dominating, right, a lot, even though their opponents, especially earlier in the season, their schedule wasn't as strong. Michigan was pretty dominant. Washington, between that first Oregon game and the second Oregon game, they were not dominant. A lot of close games for the Huskies. Is that something that the committee factors in, the margin of victory as well? Silas chiming in about this Big Ten championship game, which we're recapping. Iowa held strong the first half, making only mistakes that the Wolverines took advantage of. I thought Phil Parker once again proved why he is such a great defensive coach, why he's one of the best assistant coaches in the entire country. He proves it every single time it seems like he goes out there. But this offense, you can't help but think that this defense, one of the country's best over the last 3 seasons in the amount of talent and really good players that they've had on this defense, you can't help but think if they had an offense that was ranked 60th in the country these past 3 years, what could the Iowa Hawkeyes have accomplished? It's maybe something that will be talked about in Iowa circles, in Big Ten circles, for a very long time. Here's a comment here by XS Enigma. I think it's Michigan, Washington, Texas, Florida State. It's never been about the best 4, even though that is the criteria. Okay, but I'll continue here. Or else Ohio State would be in. Lost by 6 on the road with 2 turnovers against the soon-to-be number 1 in the country. I've been saying that the past couple of weeks. Ohio State was 30-some yards from possibly winning. They were driving down the field before Michigan got some pressure on Kyle McCord through the interception to Rod Moore. What a year this would be for a 12-team college football playoff. Let's hope we kind of get more depth and more parity. I think the transfer portal, I think NIL is creating some parity as well. More the transfer portal, I'd probably say, than NIL, right? If you over-recruit at a place like Georgia, at a place like Alabama, kids are, well, I'm not playing here. There's too many good players here. I'm going to go and I'm going to transfer to somewhere else. I'm going to transfer to an Oregon. I'm going to transfer to a Florida State. I'm going to transfer to a North Carolina. You know, just some schools kind of off the top of my head. Steven chiming in. USC needs Phil Parker. Of course, USC has a new defensive coordinator in DeAnton Lynn. He comes over across town from UCLA, kind of really propped up that Bruins defense as one of the best in the country this past season. So that's a big loss. Things are kind of spiraling downhill for the UCLA Bruins. Akil kind of chiming in, or Akil there. SEC will not be represented, according to him. I have a hard time believing that this committee is going to leave out the Southeastern Conference champion. I just don't believe it. I don't believe it. what I think, what I would do, and then what I also think the committee will do, completely different things. Completely different things. Opposite ends of the spectrum. From McKill, Michigan, Washington, Florida State, and Texas. I would say watch out for the horns in this college football playoff. A lot of people are talking about Michigan. People talking more about Washington after last night's game. Alabama, of course. Texas. I think this is a playoff that's very interesting, right? Alabama is kind of one of those teams, a defensive-minded team. You got a mobile quarterback in Jalen Milroe. How can some of these teams like a Michigan defend it? We know how Michigan is on defense. Can they contain a Jalen Milroe if that matches up? I think we could see some really fun and really interesting matchups as well. The Lost Angel, thank you for the $5. Thank you for the super chat, folks. If you want to get your comment highlighted, make sure it gets read here tonight on the show. Make sure you attach a donation and a super chat. Like the Lost Angels, all super chats are guaranteed to be read. If they put FSU in, will FSU be 3 or 4? Should be, according to the Los Angeles here, should be Michigan, Washington, Texas. I see what you did there. And I'm going to assume you mean Florida State. Graham Mertz's Gators, Billy Napier's Gators are nowhere near the college football playoff here. Okay, so let me answer this question. If that's the 4 we're going with, because that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go with the 4 you provided me. Michigan, Washington, Texas, and FSU. I believe the order should be Michigan at number 1, Washington at number 2. Oh, man, that's tough. Where was Florida State this week? I think they were at 4. I'd put Texas at 3, and I'd put FSU at 4. Right? If we're ranking, not only are the best 4 teams getting in, but we're ranking them that way, I think that would be my top 4 in the college football playoff. All right, so... All right, let's get into some more things here. JP2. I think in a 12-team playoff, the top 4 will have to be the most deserving. We'll get to that here in just a minute because I want to read the rest of this comment. Since you get a bye week, you should have to earn it with your record, not by subjectively. Okay, so here's the deal. In the 12-team playoff, the top 4 seeds, the 4 teams that receive byes, by rule, will be the top 4 ranked conference champions. So you have to be a conference champion to receive one of those 4 byes. So in this year, this is just off the top of my head, it would be Michigan at the 1, Washington at the 2. You'd probably have conference champions, Texas, Alabama, and then maybe Florida State would be the 5th one, if I were to just kind of throw some things around as well. Did I mention Washington in there? If I didn't, I meant to mention Washington, right? The Pac, I'm kind of getting used to the Pac not being a conference right now. So good question. Very good questions here tonight. I can't wait to see how this thing all goes down all tomorrow. BK chiming in. With a good point. Next year, the debates will be first-round byes. We already mentioned that with that's why these conference championship games are so going to be, there's going to be so much on the line in some of these conference title games, number 9 to number 12. Yeah, instead of arguing an undefeated team versus a 12-1 team, we're going to be arguing about a 2-loss team and a 3-loss team. Will we even be factoring, now with all this conference realignment and how the Big Ten and the SEC appear to be the power players in the country? Now, are you going to be we got a 4-loss Big Ten team that won a couple of that's got like 2 ranked wins, and then you got a Big 12 team that had 1 ranked win that's 10-2. Now are you going to be measuring the strength of the conferences going forward? I believe that's something you could possibly see here down the road. Scott Jensen chiming in. Doesn't an SEC team get in, or are you saying Texas counts as both Big 12? Texas is Big 12 as far as this playoff is concerned. Alabama with only 1 loss beating Georgia counts for something. I know, this is such a weird year. Such an odd year in the final year. A lot of finals this year in college football, of course, here in the Big Ten, the final year of the East-West Championship game, the final year of divisions, of course, the final year of a 14-team conference. So many finals in there, but I think they're going to put in the SEC champ. I really believe that. Whether that's the right thing or whether that's the wrong thing, that is not for me to decide, folks. That is not for me to decide. It's going to be a fun debate. It's going to be really fun listening as this thing goes along. It comes down to the argument. I feel like we have this argument close to every single year. Best teams versus most deserving teams. All right? And I feel like the criteria, I know Joel Klatt has talked about this throughout the last couple of years. The criteria is something. I hope that we can adjust something now that we know the top 4 seeds are going to be conference champions in the new format. Can we do something with the criteria? Can we change the language a little bit going forward? That's what I'm hoping that this committee will end up doing. That's what I'm hoping. Will it happen? I'm not completely positive that will happen. Let's go back to Silas here. Phil Parker, a diehard Hawkeye. He will be at Iowa until he retires or until Kirk Ferentz retires. I believe Kirk and Phil are tied at the hip if Kirk Ferentz decides to retire. Where does Iowa go from a head coaching standpoint? I think it's been vocalized by Phil Parker over the years. I'm not sure if he's the most interested, right, in being a head coach going forward. I think he loves coordinating a defense and really focusing on that side of the ball. There'd be a lot if Kirk Ferentz decides to retire and this is it for Kirk, boy, there's going to be some big questions in Iowa City. There's going to be big questions regardless, right? If Kirk comes back, they got to hire an offensive coordinator. Who's that going to be? Are they going to go from in-house? Are they going to go outside? Paul Chryst is somebody that's been kind of mentioned as well, the former head coach at Wisconsin. Very curious to see how this goes. More opinions. Leave your opinions. Want to hear them. Can't keep FSU out for messy wins. Washington won 8 games by 1 score and will be sitting happily at number 2. Boy, there's so many discussions that you can throw out there right now. I get a lot of these discussions. I get a lot of them. JP2. Michigan handily, number 1. They have the eye test and computers on their side. They'll likely be number 2, and UW is number 1. Not a big fan of the margin to push Michigan out of the number 1 seed. I think Michigan's been more, you talk about the eye test. I think the eye test, even though that eye test was pretty darn good last night for the Washington Huskies. When Washington plays a big-time team like Oregon, their rival, they play pretty good. Some of these other games, they haven't played as good. If Washington plays their best game, like if they play and they're physical as well like they were last night, I think Washington could be a very dangerous team within this college football playoff. Let's get to some more comments as well. All right, let's answer this one. I kind of kept this secret for a while, but I've become more open about it. Who's your favorite college football team? I grew up in Wisconsin. I'm a Badger. Grew up in Wisconsin, here living in the Midwest, been a Big Ten fan all my life. I get excited, all right? I like Wisconsin football. That's been my team since kind of the very beginning. So it's been Wisconsin. I grew up an hour north. Geez, I can't remember my directions. An hour north of Madison, Wisconsin. So a Wisconsin fan. That's kind of where my fandom. But I've always been a big fan of this conference. Always been a big fan of the Big Ten. Wisconsin and Minnesota just get as excited about a game like a Northwestern or a Purdue. So I've always loved the Midwestern culture in terms of football around here. Chris L., thank you for the $5. Ted, if you were a 5-star athlete, hey, if I am, no, I'm just kidding. What Big Ten team would you want to play for? This is a loaded question, and I appreciate this question, Chris. Appreciate the creativity. Appreciate the support of the channel here. Position of your choice. I kind of missed that. I kind of glanced over that in parentheses. If this is counting the 8, I'm kind of taking creative license on this. I'm going with the 18-team Big Ten. If I'm a quarterback, I'm going to the University of Southern California. I think Lincoln Riley's track record speaks for itself. The defense might be trash, but I know that I can get developed, right? And this is if I am a 5-star quarterback, right? Like the Caleb Williams, like some of the Kyler Murrays, and some of the other guys that have gone through the Lincoln Riley system. If I'm a quarterback, I'm going to USC. They've proven they recruit, although maybe the trenches aren't great, they recruit really good skill players. I know I'm going to try to get things going there. So a quarterback, I go though there. Running back, Michigan. I've been running behind some really good lines. I think over there at Michigan, I think that really helps out as well. So maybe if I'm a running back, I'm going to Michigan. If I'm a wide receiver, no doubt I'm going to Ohio State. Or they are wide receiver U right now. This last class, 3 of the top 5 receivers went to Columbus, Ohio. So there's that as well. All right, so Michigan, 26-0, third consecutive Big Ten championship. Of course, a lot of the discussion right now is who's in to the college football playoff. This thing really it seems to be drifting towards Alabama getting in over an undefeated Florida State. Does the committee factor in, okay, an undefeated FSU is probably not going to come after us with pitchforks like the SEC probably is, right? I know. I hope that's not something that they're considering, but maybe it is. Maybe it is. My guy, this is my guy. I love him showing up in the live chat, and he's pointing out facts. So I gotta say it when it's due. John pointing out this mess that I got going on up here. Haircut is definitely in the cards. So thank you for pointing that out. It's winter here, putting on winter hats, and it gets messed up. So thank you for pointing that out. Thanks for the reminder over there as well. Favorite college player right now, Rob Moon, fan of J.J. McCarthy on Michigan. Boy, my favorite college football player right now, that's kind of a loaded question. That's a very interesting question. It's very fun to watch Caleb Williams kind of run around and make plays, right? Kind of a little bit. Of course, he's a lot better talent, but a little bit reminiscent of how Johnny Manziel used to run around and kind of make plays at Texas A&M. But yeah, I'd kind of have to think about that one a little bit. That's a really good question, right? Who's your favorite college player? One of my favorite college players of all time right now is Melvin Gordon, right at Wisconsin. I think after that was that Nebraska game where he had 400 some yards. I think he's still running. I think he's somewhere out in northern Wisconsin. He's still running past that Nebraska defense as well. So Michigan with the victory over Iowa in the Big Ten Championship, 3 straight. It wasn't the most impressive game in the world, but they get the job done, and that's what matters in the end for this team. We're going to take a look at the final box score and kind of how this thing all went down between Michigan and Iowa on the stat line. Of course, leave your comments as it pertains to where you think some college football playoff teams are going to end up as well. So I'm going to pull up this box score right now so we can kind of break this thing down here just a little bit more. All right, there we go. J.J. McCarthy, 22 of 30. J.J. McCarthy was efficient throughout this game. He was completing a lot of passes. Okay, there was one that was nearly intercepted, but 22 of 30, 147, right? A lot of short passes. Iowa keeping everything in front of them throughout the entirety of this football game. Look at this run game. Like, I know J.J. McCarthy, of course, those sacks kind of in the college game factor into the run game, minus 35 yards there. But even if you look at Blake Corum, 16 for 52. Yes, he did get the 2 scores, but Edwards only got 4 carries. Mullings only got 3 carries throughout this game. So Iowa did a really fine job in defending this Michigan Wolverines run game. I thought things went really, really well for Iowa in the way they really defended this. And this was the defensive game plan that they needed to do. They needed to keep everything in front of them. They need to play really well at the point of attack and the run game. But we all know the problems that Iowa's offense has as well. You look at Deacon Hill over here. He threw the ball 32 times. They threw it 8 more times than they ran it throughout this game, 120 yards. It's just not going to get the job done. And you look at that rushing. Like that's kind of the thing since Deacon Hill has taken over at quarterback for Iowa, can they get a run game, right? And take a little bit more pressure off of Deacon Hill, but then a lot of other teams see that. They stack the box and says that's their only threat. It's been a rough year, I think, for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Le'Shawn Williams, 9 carries, 25 yards, leading the way. 35 yards rushing if you take out the minus 16 for Deacon Hill on some of those sacks as well. Comment here from Wednesday Chicken. I bet the committee will put FSU in. I tend to see it the different way. I tend to see it as I believe that they are going to put Alabama in. That's the way I see it. Does Florida State deserve a shot? Maybe, but there were some games throughout this season, folks, even when Jordan Travis was healthy, where Florida State was not the most impressive team in the world. They were not the most impressive team in the world. There were some games that were upset alerts, that were scares throughout this season. I'm going to go back here. Let me answer some more here.
From LA.
Let's go to, in your opinion, assuming Michigan is 1 and Washington is 2, would Michigan pick the Sugar or the Rose? I think they're going Rose, right? Because the number 1 team has the pick and where they want to go of the 2 semifinals. I think they go Rose, which is very interesting. Because if you have Michigan 1, Washington 2, let's say what are the other 2 teams, Texas and Alabama? Let's say Texas as head-to-head is number 3 and Alabama is number 4. You've got Washington, even though they're the high seed, they're going to play Texas, not too far away, Austin to New Orleans, right? And Seattle, that's a long way. So that could actually be somewhat of a home field advantage for the team that is the lower seed in that game. So that just might be how things shake out for Washington. If Washington gets the number 1 seed, right, that would obviously be an advantage for them playing on the West Coast in the Rose Bowl, having Alabama to possibly travel over there. Michigan against Texas in New Orleans might be a little bit less of a difference than maybe Washington and Texas throughout that game as well. Yeah, not for very much longer, but the Big Ten still has ties to the Rose Bowl. Yeah, if it weren't for Georgia, we had our shot. Had our shot. A Georgia win, this thing would have went, I think, pretty nicely. A Georgia win, Michigan and Washington would have played in the Rose Bowl, and then the decision would have came up to Texas or Florida State. But that's not how this thing all went down. I'm curious to see if the committee can the committee make it happen? Will the committee mess this thing up with Georgia? Boy, if you put Georgia in, and if they want to put that Georgia football team in, I just don't see an opening for them. I don't see an opening because I agree with a lot of other people. I think Texas and Bama have to go together, right? They got to either both go together, neither of them go, or Texas because of the head-to-head. The committee has said that head-to-head matters. Now, here's what I'm looking forward to on Sunday is the explanation. The explanation. They have been terrible at explaining things. Are they going to be honest? Are they going to be forthright? Or are they going to dance around some of these questions that have been asked of them as of late? Boy, this is going to be, it's going to be wild. It is going to be wild. I'll tell you that much. It's going to be certainly fun to watch as this thing really progressing, as we really find out more about who is going to get in to the college football playoff right now. But it is Michigan, the 3rd consecutive Big Ten championship. Of course, they are going all in. All in. It's a last dance type of scenario. And this is kind of the last Big Ten championship game of its kind here late. I want to thank everybody for coming aboard the live show, live reaction of the Big Ten championship game here tonight. It just didn't seem, after last night, there was a lot of juice and a lot of attention behind Oregon and Washington. And I think the SEC title game was another one. I just don't know, like the Michigan-Iowa game kind of coming into this one. Look, I kind of figured that Iowa would push back a little bit on the Michigan Wolverines, but I didn't think it would have a ton of juice to it, and that's kind of what ended up happening. It didn't have a ton of juice to it when all was said and done. So, yeah, it's been a fun season. Here is our resident Northwestern fan, Sunshine Design, has kind of said as well. So it's crazy. This season has gone by really, really quick. Really quick. It's been crazy. What's happened. So, yeah, it's been a wild season here within this conference. It's been a wild season just overall throughout all of college football. It's kind of the last year of its kind here today. Craig Robinson, here's a comment. Who do you think would win if Michigan and Alabama made it to the championship this year in 2023? Boy, that's an interesting one. And I think a big key between the Wolverines and the Crimson Tide would be, can they contain Jalen Milroe? I was watching kind of the end of that SEC championship game, and Georgia had a tough time. You know, Jalen Milroe, his mobility is such a big key to what Alabama wants to do. He can throw the ball pretty well. He can certainly throw the football pretty well down the field. Isaiah Bond, right? Good wide receiver that's kind of come up big the last few weeks. So Alabama's got a good defense. I think that's an interesting matchup for Michigan. That's an interesting matchup for an aggressive Michigan defense. And sometimes we know that some of those aggressive defenses can lead to defenders that kind of over pursue, and the quarterback, a mobile quarterback, is kind of able to get around the end around there. So that's a very interesting matchup as well. But yeah, that's certainly fun to kind of see here. Wednesday Chicken thinking Jalen Milroe they're both mobile quarterbacks. I think they can both give the opposing defenses, I think, a considerable threat. Right now, I'm seeing tweets right now, and I'm being sent tweets of the interaction between Tony Petitti and and Michigan. I had not seen it. I didn't see the trophy presentation. I'll have to kind of go back and kind of take a look at that here. But I want to thank everybody for joining the show here tonight. We're going to wrap this thing up for tonight. Michigan, three consecutive Big Ten championships. It wasn't the most impressive this time around compared to the other games in 2021 against Iowa and 2022 against the Purdue Boilermakers. We kind of put a bow on this era of the Big Ten Conference. It's going to be a lot of change going forward. So going to have a lot of content, previews. We're going to have some reactions of who's going to which bowl games. We're going to know that tomorrow. We're going to preview some bowl games here throughout the month of December. And you know the transfer portal is going to heat up big time, folks. So until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. Make sure you subscribe on the way out. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you